home. I don't know why. They were going crazy. So let's finish chapter 3. I'm picking up where I left off from Why Priests Should Wed, 1888. Justin Dewey Fulton was the author. A third reason for the injunction of sacerdotal celibacy arose from the pontifical policy. Cardinal Rodolph, arguing in a Roman consistory in favor of clerical celibacy, affirmed that the priesthood, if allowed to marry, would transfer their attachment from the Pope to their family and prince, and this would tend to the injury of the ecclesiastical community. The Holy See, the cardinal alleged, would by this means be soon limited to the Roman city. The Transalpine party in the Council of Trent used the same argument. The introduction of priestly matrimony, this faction urged, would sever the clergy from their close dependence on the popedom and turn their affections to their family and consequently to their king and country. Marriage connects men with their sovereign and with the land of their nativity. Celibacy, on the contrary, transfers the attention of the clergy from His Majesty and the state to His Holiness and the Church. The man who has a wife and children is bound by conjugal and parental attachment to his country and feels the warmest glow of parental love mingled with the flames of patriotism. His interests and affections are intertwined with the honor and prosperity of his native land, and this, in consequence, he will prefer to the aggrandizement of the Romanish hierarchy or the grandeur of the Roman pontiff. The dearest object of his heart are embraced in the soil that gave them birth, the people among whom they live, and the government that affords them protection. Celibacy, on the contrary, preludes all these engagements and directs the undivided affection of the priesthood to the church and its ecclesiastical sovereign. The clergy becomes dependent on the Pope rather than on their ruler, and endeavor to promote the prosperity of the papacy rather than their country. Such are not linked with the state by an offspring whose happiness is involved in the prosperity of the nation. Gregory VII, accordingly, the great enemy of kings, was the distinguished patron of sacerdotal celibacy. He succeeded to a great extent in the suppression of priestly marriage. He summoned a council and issued canons separating the married clergy from their partners and forbidding the ordination of any who would not vow perpetual continence. He prohibited the laity from hearing Mass when celebrated by a married priest. These enactments he enforced with his usual obstinacy and with his usual success. The laity seconded his efforts and refused the communion and baptism from the married clergy. Such, in brief, is the history of celibacy as recorded by different ecclesiastical historians. Celibacy is the devil's own, and will hold his place until he is beaten and broken by the power of God. The effect on the clergy was terrible. The law ran counter to the tide of human nature and to the stream of human affection. The clergy, in many instances, resisted the mandate, and the exaction of obedience became a difficult task. A variety of plans were invented to evade or violate its severity. One variety took the name of domesticism. This consisted in keeping female inmates in the dwellings of the priest. These were women devoted in profession, though not by vow, to virginity. Their ostensible duty was to superintend the domestic concerns of the house. The clergy enjoyed their society, while these maidens in return shared the clergy's bed and board. Forbidden to marry, they converted their homes into brothels. Cyprian, Jerome, and Chrysostom depicted the cohabitation of these holy domestics with a bold but faithful pencil. Cyprian mentions in language of strong condemnation their domestic familiarity by day and their occupation of the same bed at night. The adultery and fornication of the clergy degenerated in many instances into incest and other abominations of the grossest kind. Some priests, according to the Council of Mentz in 888, had sons by their own sisters. The Council of Nicaea and some other of a latter date, through fear of scandal, deprived the clergy of all female company except a mother, a sister, or an aunt. It did no good. The means intended for prevention were the occasion of more accumulated scandal and more heinous criminality. The interdiction was the introduction of incestuous and unnatural prostitution. Is there a reason to suppose that this state of things does not now exist? Recently, at a dinner given after the funeral of a priest who had been attended, some 100 priests were present. The caterer was a Baptist. He said that after the wine began to flow, their conversation became so filthy that the waiting girls were shocked, and the brutes revealed in tales of what they enjoyed with the domestics in their homes, offering to share their pleasures like brute beasts with their fellows, and this in America, the land of the free. Concubinage was another mode of evading the canons. This was a natural result of the unnatural regulations against wedlock. The accounts on this subject transmitted by the historians of these times are appalling. Profligacy prevailed among the clergy, who practiced all kinds of lewdness. Otto declares that the clergy kept filthy harlots in their houses. These, in a public manner, bedded and boarded with their consecrated paramours. Fascinated with their wanton allurements, the abandoned clergy conferred on the partners of their guilt the superintendence of their family and all their domestic concerns. These courtesans, during the lives of their companions in iniquity, managed their households, and at their death inherited their property. The ecclesiastical alms and revenues in this manner descended to the accomplices of vile prostitution. The hirelings of pollution were adorned, the church wasted, and the poor oppressed, by men who professed to be the patrons of purity, the guardians of truth, and the protectors of the wretched and the needy. Damien represents the guilty mistress confessing to the guilty priest. This presented another absurdity and an aggravation of the crime. The formality of confessing what the father confessor knew and receiving forgiveness from a partner in sin was an insult to common sense and presented one of the many ridiculous scenes which have been exhibited on the theater of the world. Confession and absolution in this way were, after all, very convenient. The fair penitent had not far to go for pardon, nor for an opportunity of repeating the fault which might qualify her for another course of confession. That is insane. And remission. Her spiritual father could spare her blushes, and his memory could supply any deficiency of recollection and the enumeration of her sins. A minute recapitulation of time, plays, and other circumstantial trifles would be unnecessary. The rehearsal of the delicious sin might, to both, be very amusing. The sacrament of confession in this manner would be recalling the transaction to mind, become very edifying, and afford a renewal of this enjoyment. The confessor, in the penance which he just prescribed on these occasions, exemplified the virtues of compassion and charity. Christian commiseration and sympathy took the place of rigor and strictness. The Holy Father, indeed, could not be severe on so a dear friend, and the lady could not refuse to be kind again to such an indulgent father. This language, so descriptive of what is horrid, and yet so insensible to the sin and wickedness of the transactions chronicled, proves the hopelessness of the attempt to reform Romanism. In the estimation of the writers, it is little more than a caricature of Christianity at variance with morality, destructive of piety, a sink of iniquity, a barrier to progress, and the foe of all that is elevating and ennobling in literature, in art, or religion. A third variety for the invasion of the canonical interdiction was clandestine or avowed matrimony. Some of the priests, though they could ill afford it, wished to keep a conscience. These, of course, would shudder at the commission of fornication or adultery, and had recourse, therefore, to the honorable institution of heaven for the prevention of such pollution. These, entrenched behind the authority of God, withstood the commandments of men. The number of these continued to increase in opposition to the decretals of the Pope, the canons of council, and the prepositions of the people. Such was the state of the clerical matrimony at the accession of Hildebrand to the popedom in 1073. He determined to destroy clerical marriage, let come what might, to morality, to virtue, to domestic happiness. The fight was very bitter while it lasted. Its influence is still felt. At this point, a fact might be stated which throws light upon the possibilities within reach of Romanists. A married priest is living in this country, identified with the Roman Catholic Church. His name is Reverend John Walensky, a Ruthian or Greek of Little Russia, a Marianite, admitted to the Romish communion by the bull of Pope Benedict XIV in 1741. So it came to pass that even the popes recognized the married clergy and Greek rites and the service in vulgar tongues as quite consistent with the unity of the Roman communion. Why then, asked Bishop A. Cleveland Cox in his article on the model Roman Catholics, why then do the bolder spirits in America who are attached to the papacy, but who also wish to be Americans, fail to see their opportunity? If Edward McGlynn, D.D., would leave his land theories to laymen and devote his abilities and energies to exacting of the Roman court in behalf of Roman Catholics here, what the Pope concedes to them in Lithuania, he would perform a work worthy of a lifetime and would be entirely consistent with his profession as a priest. He would emancipate hundreds of his brethren and would entitle himself to the everlasting gratitude of those who, like him, adhere to the papacy, but are equally determined to be true Americans. He would soon find, as did the Marianites, that the court of Rome, with all its great swelling words, will exhibit only abject submission and servility when once boldly confronted by those who know their rights and dare to maintain them. Among those rights, he ought to know that with the Anglo-Saxon forefathers, it was a sacred principle that not even ecclesiastics should be summoned out of their own country to answer for alleged offenses, even these strictly religious and not political. And all Americans ought to know that in order to make the court of Rome omnipotent among its subjects here, the whole body of Americans who profess the Trent faith, as well laity as ecclesiastics, are denied the position of a national church, having rights under the canon law, and are held as mere missions under the untempered despotism of a foreign principality, administered, in the case of a parish priest, with a decree of severity and cruelty which they keenly feel, but dare not resent. The spirit of Rome is seen in the fight waged with Walensky. When he arrived in Philadelphia, he called at the cathedral, then in charge of Vicar General Walsh, with whom he had an interview. This interview was abruptly broken off when the vicar learned that his priestly visitor was a married man and his wife with him. In Shenandoah, he received much the same sort of reception from the priests. Alas, how little they care for the scriptures. Cardinal Antonelli, if he did not have a wife, has a daughter now connected with the scandal. He was for years the bosom friend of Pio Nono. His better half was not a wife, and that entitled him to daily fellowship with the Pope and to give new dogmas in his name to the universe. It is so here. Father Walensky might have had a woman, not his wife, and been welcome to the cathedral palace. Obey God, and Rome shuts the door in your face. Disobey God, and the door stands wide open for promotion. Cardinal Gibbons and other prelates are invited to consider how the papal bull of 1741 conflicts with the practices of the church at this hour. Where is the unity then? Let Roman ecclesiastics demand the same proprieties of life to be conceded to them as Americans, which are guaranteed to these Russians and Hungarians. If not, by what rule of consistency is the right refused? Reverend E. W. Walsh, once a Trappist monk in the monastery of Bardstown, Kentucky, says, I have been as thrilled and electrified by the revelations in why priests should wed as anyone in the land. Frequently in the past, I have thought within myself in regard to these vile priestly doings. Are they going to be covered forever? Because for some reason or other, men will not dare expose the perfidy and criminality of ecclesiastics who are in high places, and the unscrupulous in the means employed to defeat the ends of those they hate. I am thankful to God that there is somebody who possesses the courage to tell the world what is being done in these things of iniquity under the cloak of religion and in the name of Christ. In the city of Boston are men who violate their solemn vows with impunity. I have been in pastors' homes where the curates protested against their having women in their private parlors at the most unseasonable hours, and I have known priests who spend Sundays card playing and drinking in the company of young women who varied the monotony by way of penance imposed by some holy father on their confers with a period of osculation which was passed around the circle. My own family, when I returned from Kentucky to this city, not knowing I was disaffected, flung in my face the profligate lives of priests who visited hotels in their control in company with young girls whom they introduced as their sisters and run up large bills for turkey suppers and champagne remaining until the small hours of the morning. And when they reasoned with me afterwards in New York to induce me to come back again to the fold of Rome, I said, do you want me to confess my sins to such men as those who spent nights in your hotel in the society of harlots? Would you have me even associate with such men as Father So-and-so, who has had the unblushing boldness to have females in his house under the very eye of his curates, whose characters were of the most questionable sort? Tell me a single priest of your acquaintance into whose charge I would commit my soul, those who have been drunk in your office and house, and of whom such unsavory things are reported. Alongside of our monastery was an institution which one of our monks fiercely denounced on one occasion to a visiting prelate as a devilish place that ought to be torn down. And when the immorality of the inmates became a settled fact, these saintly prostitutes who lived in the closest intimacy with the Trappist celibates, the Right Reverend Father in God, the abbot being the principal and the most conspicuous actor in this vile drama, were turned adrift, which resulted in drawing from the coffers of the monks $10,000 for hush money. The superioress of this so-called nunnery was the wife of a man who was in the Kentucky penitentiary, and the girls were largely off the public streets of Louisville. Who will ever tell the fiendish transactions of that place by these monsters of iniquity? The many innocent lives that were taken to hide the sin of celibates and cover the shame of women who, under the hideous mask of piety and chastity, committed the foulest sins and degraded utterly their womanhood. Many things came out in the conflict between abbot and bishop that Romanists wished had never seen the light of day. The bishop was accused of wrongdoing in the same line that the abbot and some of the monks were exposed for. And crimination and recrimination between priest and monk seemed to be the order of the day. For when rogues and hypocrites fell out, the truth was uncovered, and facts that filled the papists with horror were as numerous as the stars of a wintry night. It is a fact that some of the best priests that ever officiated at Romish altars were known to have their own wives and children, though on the sly, and it is also a fact that the most profligate and vile among them are the loudest in their hypocritical professions of chastity and celibacy. And St. Louis Republican of June 20th, 1887, printed a letter from Bishop Hogan of the Catholic Diocese of St. Joseph's, Missouri, which was brought out in court and was never intended for publication, but it reveals a sad state of affairs. The bishop appointed a German priest over an Irish congregation. This gave so great offense to some parties that the letter in question was written in self-defense. His defense is that the priests of his diocese were such a drunken lot that he was compelled to supply the parish as he did. He then gives a list by name of 22 priests that were received into the diocese from 1869 to 1876, whom he was compelled to dismiss on account of immorality, especially drunkenness. Some of them are described as constantly drunk. One is now going round from city to city, a drunken wreck. So disgraceful was the state of affairs that he was compelled at last to turn over a new leaf. He says, the constant shameful public and sacrilegious drunkenness of the last three mentioned priests who were by my side at the cathedral determined me to wipe them and their kind out of my jurisdiction. Herbert, after repeated drunkenness, went into a spree for a week in my house, was in the house, broke out at night, got into a house of disreputable women in his drunkenness, and was thrown out into the street, picked up drunk, recognized, and taken into a house and made sober, and put into a carriage and taken to my house. That evening, Galvin and Kiley were told by me to prepare for the proper celebration of the feast of the patronage of St. Joseph for Easter Sunday. On Saturday night, they stayed up all night drinking, carousing, and shouting. Kiley fell down, blackened, and almost broke his face in falling. Of course, the two sacrilegious priests said Mass the next day, and Kiley went into the pulpit and preached with his blackened and bruised face to the people of the cathedral. This was on the feast of the patron of the diocese and of the universal church. It was time for me to begin a reformation. The bishop began to purge his diocese, and of course met with resistance from the drinking priests and their friends. But what a revelation of the secrets of a diocese this is. Let every American insist upon a married priesthood and for a pure Christian home rule. Let the husband become the head of the home with no shadow of a priest coming between him and his household. And the cloud that darkens the path of Romanus will be chased away, and millions will find their way back to the Halian days of Ambrose before the shadow of an iron scepter of Hildebrandt darkened the world. Then confidence shall take the place of suspicion, and the priesthood of the Romanist Church shall join with the ministry of evangelical denominations in seeking and ennobling civilization for the land we love and the God we serve. Wow. That's pretty powerful stuff. All right, brothers and sisters, that concludes chapter 3. We'll pick up next time in chapter 4. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your heart, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Bye-bye.